giving you everything you need to fight the Trump administration. This is The Bill Press Show, live at youtube.com/The Bill Press Show.
Good morning and happy Friday, everyone. If this is a voice you're not familiar with, my name is Chris Liu, and I am guest hosting for Bill today. We are live from Washington, D.C., a couple blocks away from the U.S. Capitol. It's a beautiful Friday here in D.C. It's 90 degrees today, which is crazy. I'm joined, as always, by Bill's producer, Peter Ogburn, as well as his fantastic staff. We're excited to be here today.
Good to see you, man.
It's fun to be here. This is my second time guest hosting. I obviously didn't suck too much the first time, and you all let me come back, which I appreciate.
You were great. We're happy to have you back.
Well, it's fun to be here. We have a fantastic set of guests today. We're going to do a little bit news of the day, and then we got some sort of deeper topics to talk about some of the changes that we probably need to make in our country after Trump leaves. So today we will have Reilly, who's a senior justice reporter for HuffPost, and then we will have former Congressman, Democratic Congressman Glenn Nye, who is the CEO at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And then following him, we'll have Rudy Mehrbani, who is a senior counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice. And so we'll be talking, obviously, about the big news, which is Stormy Daniels, Giuliani, shakeups in Trump's legal world, and then talking a little bit more about what has Trump meant to our country, what has he meant to politics, and how do we move forward. But first, let me flip it over to Peter.
This is the Full Court Press.
Yes, indeed. Just a couple of other stories making news. If you are planning a trip to Hawaii, make sure you pack everything. Obviously, a swimsuit. Obviously, some flip-flops, sandals. Obviously, some sunscreen. But wait. Yesterday, Hawaii actually became the very first state to pass a bill banning the sale of any sunscreen that has certain chemicals in it. Now, this is why they did this. You might wonder, why in the world would they be banning sunscreen? Well, a lot of sunscreen contains the chemicals oxybenzone and octinoxate, which I deserve an award for getting those
there
names
you go.
right.
It sounded right. I don't know if it was right, but it sounded right. Right.
It might not be right. But those two chemicals are in a lot of different sunscreens, and the problem is they contribute to coral bleaching. And so much of it gets washed off in the ocean, or, you put on too much sunscreen, it easily comes off, and it finds its way to those coral reefs. And so they are banning those sunscreens. There are over 3,500 different kinds of sunscreen products that contain those specific chemicals, and so they are getting rid of it. The bill will take effect in 2021 if it is signed by the governor, and he said he will sign it. So now you're basically at like prescription sunscreens that contain these that don't contain these chemicals that are allowed.
So I just came back from Hawaii. I was there a month ago and probably carrying contraband sunscreen, and
right.
It will be now. When you show up, they're going to ask you, did you bring any meat into the country? Do you have any fresh fruit? Let me check your sunscreen. Hey, I thought you were going to take it in a different direction. There's a live volcano.
I was going to mention that.
Go ahead.
I was going to mention that the next hour. So we'll just make that a tease for next hour when we get to that. But I did want to mention another story because you're a Twitter guy. You're on Twitter.
Huge Twitter guy.
Where are you on Twitter?
Thank you.
You like how I teed that up for you?
Chris Liu 44 on Twitter.
Chris Liu 44 on Twitter. Well, Twitter yesterday came out and recommended that all of its users, 336 million different users, all of them need to change their password. They discovered a bug that saved user passwords in what they are calling an internal log that is unprotected. They said they fixed the issue, but because it had gone on for so long and had gone unnoticed for so long, literally everyone on Twitter might have had their password compromised.
And I will tell you, I did do it, and I recommend everyone do it. It's relatively easy.
Yeah, look, we're on Twitter at BP Show. We take a lot of comments from people. We know that you're out there. If you're on Twitter, if you're trying to use it to reach out to the show at BP Show, just change your password. That's all we're asking you to do.
Take The Bill Press Show anywhere you go. Download our free podcast, search for The Bill Press Show on iTunes, and catch the highlights from every show.
Happy Friday, everyone. My name is Chris Liu, and I am guest hosting for Bill on this beautiful Friday, very warm Friday here in Washington, D.C. I am joined by Bill's wonderful staff, including Peter Ogburn, his producer.
Good to see you back, man.
It's fun to be here, my second time guest hosting. I feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm still not comfortable with the short amount of bathroom breaks you've given me. So if I start sounding a little dehydrated about an hour into the show, it's because I'm not allowed any coffee because I can't go to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up how we literally lock you into that room.
You really do lock
I'm
me.
sorry you can't.
I'm amazed that Bill does this every morning. Well, look, my name is Chris Liu. You can follow me on Twitter, ChrisLiu44. You can follow the Bill Press Show at BP Show at Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube, youtube.com, The Bill Press Show. We're on Patreon. We're on Facebook. The podcast is on iTunes as well. So we've got a fantastic show today. A couple of guests who are former friends. They are current friends, former colleagues of mine. First, we're going to talk to Ryan Reilly. Ryan is the senior justice reporter for HuffPost, and he's been doing some great reporting on Mueller. And obviously, this whole investigation took kind of an odd turn on Wednesday evening, and we'll talk a little bit more about that with Mayor Giuliani apparently going rogue, although the stories are a little unclear as to how much the president knew about that. And then after that, I think we're going to take a little bit deeper, more intellectual dive into what has happened to our country over these past 15 months. We're first going to have Glenn Nye. Glenn is a former congressman from my state, the Commonwealth of Virginia. He represented the 2nd Congressional District for one term and is now the CEO of a think tank in Washington called the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. And the center that Glenn runs has a brand new initiative on incivility in politics and how we can fix that. And so that's a much needed initiative. And so that will be a great conversation. And then in the last half hour, we have Rudy Mehrbani. Rudy had a number of important jobs during the Obama administration, most notably as the director of the Presidential Personnel Office in the Obama administration. So Rudy can give you kind of an interesting perspective on all things nominations and appointments in Trump world and why they can't seem to get it right. I have to say I will also be asking Rudy about this incredible Washington Post story from about a month ago that PPO, which is what the office is called, apparently has become the party place in the Trump White House, and people hang out and vape there and play drinking games, which is not what I remember.
I was going to say, it's kind of like what you were doing.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. We would just hang out there and play drinking games. And then Rudy, as importantly now, is at the Brennan Center, which has a brand new initiative on how we take democratic norms and strengthen them. So, two important conversations. But before we get to that, this has been kind of I want to say it's been a nutty week, although it's probably been a typical week in Trump world. I was just kind of listing some of the things that have happened in the last 7 days. We've had this odd bromance between Trump and Kanye West. We've had the Ronnie Jackson nomination that fell apart. That actually fell apart last Friday morning, so we're 7 days away from that.
It's you mentioned that this morning. We were talking at our pre-show meeting, right? And I thought to myself that it literally has been like less than a week.
Right.
Like right at a week.
Right at a week.
Because I remember it happened during the show on Friday of last week.
Right.
Which is remarkable.
Okay, so that was Friday. Last Friday, the House, I'm not going to say the House Intelligence Committee, the Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee released their report that they claimed exonerated the president. There was last Saturday night was the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which I know you all talked a lot about, the jokes about Sarah Sanders. Monday, we had the NBC reporting on Monday evening where John Kelly apparently called the president an idiot, which is not a moron. We could debate whether it's better to be an idiot or moron. I think they're both equally bad.
Please don't call me either.
Right, and particularly when you add a qualifying term in front of one of those, which apparently what Tillerson may have said. So that was Monday night. We've had a steady stream of Scott Pruitt stories, and I'll go into that a little bit. We have shakeups on the Trump legal team. Ty Cobb, not the baseball player, but the guy with kind of that funny, villainy mustache, has stepped down. You'll recall that the other main lawyer on Trump's legal team, John Dowd, has also stepped down as well. We have a new person with the name Emmett Flood, apparently a pretty top-notch lawyer. We had on Wednesday the raid on Donald Trump's doctor's office. Again, not Ronnie Jackson, the guy. This is now the other guy with the kind of crazy look about him, and apparently the raid, they took away all of the Donald Trump's medical records, and apparently the story is that they were upset that he had the doctor had said that Donald Trump uses a hair replacement medicine, Propecia, I think it was.
Propecia, yeah.
Propecia. And then obviously Wednesday night we had the crazy train wreck that is Major Giuliani on the Sean Hannity show disclosing the Stormy Daniels payment. In between all of that, that was this Trump world. In between all of that, we had a House chaplain that got fired and now is apparently back in his job again.
He's back.
He is back. We have had some interesting admissions by Republicans. We've had Marco Rubio in the last week admitting that the tax cuts have not gone to increase wages of workers, which is pretty much what we all predicted. We've got Trump's former HHS Secretary Tom Price admitting that Republican efforts to sabotage the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, have raised premiums or will raise premiums. And then yesterday, I didn't know this, was National Prayer Day.
Yeah.
And so less than 24 hours after Giuliani acknowledges that the money paid to Michael Cohen, to Stormy Daniels, did ultimately come from the president, and the president was aware of that. You have the president in the Rose Garden, I think it was, announcing a new faith initiative. Let's play that clip.
I will soon be signing an executive order to create a faith initiative at the White House.
Peter, what faith initiative is that lawyers who pay hush money will have faith that their clients will pay them back?
I think that Donald Trump thinks that Faith Initiative is the name of a porn star.
Peter,
he can't actually.
Oh my gosh, we have to trademark that.
Right?
I mean, we could make some serious money on that.
Right? Like, he probably is looking for a porn star whose name is Faith Initiative. That's the only reason that he would actually get into that.
Somebody please go on Twitter and create that Twitter page,
Yeah.
and we need to start tweeting off of
It
that.
really is amazing that he can come out the day after. I mean, 12 hours after Rudy Giuliani goes on Fox News with Sean Hannity and confirms that Donald Trump paid personal money to keep an adult film actress quiet that he had an affair with, and then he turns around and goes and celebrates the National Day of Prayer and talks about creating these new faith initiatives. I mean that's stunning.
Yeah, we use the word shameless a lot. I'm not even sure shameless even does it justice anymore.
We're going to have to redefine the word shameless.
Right. And, and you have these faith leaders standing there with him. And there's been, a lot of reporting about Trump's support from white evangelicals and how it is, higher than previous presidents, even Republican presidents. It's growing. It's odd to say the least. It's easy for me to say, not being a white evangelical, that they are hypocrites. But there's something else there. And, perhaps if I don't suck on this second guest host, I will bring some folks in who can have this conversation. There were several colleagues of mine in the Obama White House who worked on the Faith Initiative who might be able to better discern what I think is a pretty obvious disconnect.
It's such a fascinating conversation to have, right? Because I'm one of those people that is like, get religion out of government, full stop, right? All together. Get it all out of the government. I don't think it has any place in there. However, there have been Democrats who have been in the office, Barack Obama being one of them, that found a way to embrace religion in his life and in the political world without having it dictate how policy gets made, which is a problem that a lot of Republicans have gotten themselves into in the past, right?
No, that's exactly
so there is a
right.
way to sort of thread that needle.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and and there's the ludicrous nature of Trump's statements. In the remarks yesterday, he talked about how his favorite book is the Bible. Now, I by the way, I'm Chris Liu. I'm guest hosting today for Bill Press. I had the privilege of working for Barack Obama for 11 out of his 12 years in Washington. Barack Obama is a deep man of faith. If we were playing biblical Jeopardy, he would dust Donald Trump. He would go to the $1,000 questions immediately and start quoting scripture verse by verse. But it's an odd thing. And, and I've talked to folks who know this and say, a lot of it is abortion. A lot of it is judicial nominations, and but we ought to explore this conversation more than in just this time.
Yeah, I agree. And I really do think that we're at an interesting time with religion and politics in that I think that religious progressives are starting to find their voice, which they hadn't in previous years, right? Like I grew up in an evangelical house. I saw how and it was a conservative house. I saw how conservatives just sort of grabbed a hold of the evangelical vote and message and made it their own. And Democrats just kind of watched it go by, frankly. And now you have really progressive religious leaders out there, whether it's Reverend Dr. Barber or Jim Wallace or other people that are out there that are saying like, no. If you look at the teachings of Jesus Christ, if you are a Christian and you believe in this, there is a very, very, very big part of this that is helping the poor, help the people that need help, feed the hungry, things like that, as opposed to everything that Republicans have done when they have power, which is take food out of the mouths of people that are hungry.
And you add then the disconnect with the firing of the House chaplain, who was a Jesuit priest, and ostensibly fired for a couple of reasons. One is that he may have done in one of his opening prayers during the tax debate a call for fairness as policymakers considered how the tax burdens should be placed. That was one reason he may have been fired. The second reason he may have been fired was because the theory being that as a Catholic priest, he could not counsel members of Congress about personal issues involving spouses or family members. And so you have that incident, which does seem to suggest, again, an anti-Catholic bias juxtaposed with National Day of Prayer, juxtaposed with Stormy Daniels. It's an odd period of time in religion and politics in Washington right now.
I want to read a really great tweet from our friend Matt Fuller, who's on the show often, and he just said, Paul Ryan not actually having a conversation with the House chaplain before he asked for his resignation and sending his chief of staff to do the job squares with my idea of Paul Ryan. So that's, as the story unfolded, it turns out Paul Ryan did not do what he said he did, right? Like he came out and he said, look, I had multiple members saying this is not acceptable. We need to get rid of this guy. He's not doing his job. He's not serving us. And Republican members came out and they were like, you're making that up. You didn't hear from me and I didn't hear from anybody else. And it feels like you're just sort of grinding an axe here, dude.
Right. Well, look,
it turns out that's what he was doing.
That's exactly right. Look, before we get out of this topic of religion, which is one that I, of all people, should not be discussing, I do want to play a clip from the vice president talking about his boss as a man of faith.
Today, President Trump will take another strong step to protect and promote Americans of faith, because in this White House, believers of every background have a champion in President Donald Trump.
I know we're on the radio, so you can't see me shaking my head, but I'm just, I don't even know what to say about that.
You know, man, I have this conversation with my parents a lot because I know I feel like I've mentioned this all the time, right? But my parents voted for Donald Trump, and they're very religious people. I just saw them a couple of weeks ago, and we had this conversation about the payment to Stormy Daniels and all this stuff. And I don't know if their story is unique to other people, but they're over Donald Trump. They're just like, no, this is too much. And part of it is like they take their faith more seriously than their politics. And I know that a lot of people don't.
Yeah. No.
I mean, if you look at Donald Trump's base and you look at the support he has among evangelicals, I think you could easily point to, like, yeah, they care about their politics more than their faith.
Yeah.
Because if you consider yourself to be a person of faith and you consider to be someone who follows the work and the teachings of Christ, which I am not, but my parents are, and there are a lot of people who are, right? If you believe in that stuff, how could you possibly support Donald Trump? And pick a reason.
Right. And to have, again, look, you're the vice president of the United States. Mike Pence is the vice president. He needs to say whatever he has to say about his boss. But to say that people of faith have no greater champion than Donald Trump is absurd. Although I will say just one funny moment, since we know how the vice president is around gay people. There was this kind of funny moment yesterday where he swore in the new ambassador to Germany. I don't know if you saw this, Peter.
I didn't.
Okay, so the new ambassador to Germany is openly gay, which is fantastic. He is being sworn in with his partner. I don't know if it's a husband or what. It's a partner. The partner's holding the Bible, and as the new ambassador is being sworn in, and Pence is swearing him in. And you could just have a field day kind of putting your own caption or thought bubbles as to what Pence is thinking as he's swearing in an openly gay ambassador. Well, look, I did not want to devolve into religion because it's not a subject I know well, but I am Chris Liu. I am guest hosting for Bill this morning. I am a senior fellow at the University of Virginia Miller Center, which is a center that studies the presidency and studies politics. We've got some fantastic guests in the 8 o'clock hour who can talk a little bit more about where our country is and how we fix it going forward after Trump. And, one of the jobs I had in the Obama administration was as the White House cabinet secretary, which meant that I managed the cabinet. And one of the most important tasks I had was to ensure that cabinet members did not get into trouble and certainly did not embarrass the president. And I will tell you that every day I open the paper, I will say every couple hours I open the paper, and I see another story about Scott Pruitt, the EPA administrator. He is really the poster child for everything that people hate about politics. And so as I was preparing for the show, I pulled a number of stories about him. And then literally in the last 12 hours, there have been another set of stories. And if you can think of an ethical impropriety, Scott Pruitt has committed it. Now, to be fair, my good friend Ron Klain, who served as the chief of staff to Vice President Biden, tweeted at me the other day when I made this comment on another show. And he said, look, I don't think Scott Pruitt has actually ripped out the mattress tag that you're not supposed to rip out. Other than that, he probably has committed every other impropriety. And just overnight. So let me just give you two stories overnight. So yesterday afternoon, New York Times, which has done some fantastic reporting about Scott Pruitt's web of business connections in Oklahoma, how he somehow managed to buy luxury homes with the assistance of business and law firm associates who have helped him. He bought a stake in a minor league franchise. Reported, and I'll just read from the New York Times story yesterday. As a state senator in Oklahoma 15 years ago, Mr. Pruitt bought a home in the state capital with a registered lobbyist who was pushing for changes to the state's workers' compensation rules, changes that Mr. Pruitt championed in the legislature. So he bought a house with a lobbyist who was lobbying the Oklahoma legislature on legislative changes that Pruitt supported. That's astounding. Never been reported before. And then late last night, the Washington Post reported we've heard way too much about Scott Pruitt's propensity for first-class travel, his security details, his purchase of the $43,000 soundproof booth. Earlier this week, we learned that Scott Pruitt took a trip to Morocco that cost the federal government $100,000. It was arranged by a lobbyist friend of his who was getting a $40,000 a month retainer for the government of Morocco. One of the tasks was to help organize his trip. So that was Morocco. We learned yesterday morning, because the stories literally come out multiple times a day, there was a trip that Pruitt tried to take to Australia that was also arranged by a lobbyist friend of his. And then late last night, the Washington Post reported that a trip that Pruitt took to Israel was also arranged by business and political associates. And let me just read you one paragraph from that article. The Washington Post, Juliet Eilperin and Brady Dennis, who have done great reporting on this, quote, after taking office last year, Pruitt drew up a list of at least a dozen countries he hoped to visit and urged aides to help him find official reasons to travel. Pruitt then enlisted well-connected friends and political allies to help him make the trips happen. His goal was to visit one country every single month. I mean, this is like what is this like? This is what kids do after they graduate from college. They like ask dad to go visit, or I shouldn't say dad, mom or dad. Hey, send me on this European boondoggle trip.
Yeah, I remember whenever I was named cabinet secretary, I backpacked across Europe to go find myself.
I mean, again, I said this at the outset. I worked for Barack Obama for 11 out of 12 years. Obama and I are actually law school classmates. Had I done even one of the things that Scott Pruitt has been accused of doing over the last 15 months, I would have been out on the street. And the fact that he gets away with this, and again, I don't know if we're at the end of the line for here. The line just keeps going on, but it is astounding. I mean, this is leaving aside the hypocrisy about Trump saying I'm draining the swamp. I mean, we're now in the swampiest possible place. It's hard to imagine a more corrupt cabinet member in recent history.
Well, it's funny because we talked about how one of the messaging things that Democrats are going to use for the upcoming midterms is a throwback to something that we heard before, and that is they're going to use the phrase culture of corruption. And we've been doing this show for a while, and I remember that was a phrase that a lot of people running for Congress used when George W. Bush was president,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of corrupt situations happening around town. I would say that pales in comparison to what we're seeing now. So it's totally appropriate to bring it back. I mean, when you just look at Scott Pruitt alone, the just brazen open grift that you're seeing from him is certainly stunning.
Yeah, it is certainly stunning. And I would say for those of you who are probably younger than me and Peter, go back and look at the 2006 midterm elections. This was during the period of time of Jack Abramoff, Tom DeLay, Bob Ney, Duke Cunningham. We had a scandal involving Mark Foley towards the end of that campaign cycle. And Democrats ran very successfully on this idea of culture of corruption, and it really is what took them over the top both in the House and Senate. And you see that playing out very, very vividly here.
It's almost like this is what happens when Republicans get power.
Well, and the buck ultimately stops with the person at the top. And when you've got a president from day one who not only shows an indifference to ethics, but really a disregard for ethics, it basically becomes open season for everyone under him to exploit the system as much as possible.
Yeah, and the fact that he's putting up sort of a front now and continues to say Scott Pruitt is a good man, Scott Pruitt did nothing wrong, whatever. I mean, Scott Pruitt's at this point has survived it, and I don't know what it would be that would ultimately bring him down.
No, it's stunning. Well, look, this is Chris Liu, guest hosting for Bill Press. It is a beautiful Friday morning, and we'll be back with our guests.
Download our podcast, search for The Bill Press Show on iTunes, and remember to rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Bill Press Show.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you eat stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
I forgot. I'll do better. Please.
Don't quit on me. Okay. But remember, it's not what you say. It's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees?
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
This is the Bill Press Show.
Good morning, everyone. This is Chris Liu. I am guest hosting for Bill on a beautiful Friday morning, a warm Friday morning here in Washington, D.C. I know all the listeners keep saying, why do you keep saying that? Because it's like 90 degrees here, which is kind of insane. Please follow me on Twitter, ChrisLiu44. Hope you will subscribe to The Bill Press Show on YouTube, youtube.com, The Bill Press Show, as well as following Bill and the show on Twitter at BP Show. We've got a fantastic guest in first this morning, Ryan Reilly. Ryan is the senior justice reporter for HuffPost, and you can follow him at Ryan Reilly. At Ryan J. Reilly. There's probably some other Ryan Reilly who.
Probably.
Yeah. Okay.
On that, yeah.
Well, Ryan, thanks for coming in. There's a lot going on right now. You've been writing recently about the mayor Giuliani's interview on Stormy Daniels, the Republican attacks on Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, the House intel report, and we've had just kind of this amazing, I'll say, flood of news, although that's an inadvertent pun with the new name of the lawyer who's serving Trump. Lots to break down here. What did you make? I'm just curious. Wednesday night's interview with Giuliani on Sean Hannity. When did you find out about that, and what did you make as you were watching this? What appeared from the outside to be a train wreck happening in real time.
Yeah, I was watching it live. I mean, I think that an essential part of the DOJ beat these days is watching Sean Hannity, because you sort of can look in the future and see, okay, here's what the president's going to tweet about tomorrow. Here's what my day is going to look like. I mean, it's a cycle, right? So, what's on Sean Hannity can sometimes dictate, the next morning. Same thing with Fox and Friends. Both are on my DVR. I don't always get to Fox and Friends, but pretty much every day I get to Hannity. And I think that really, it shows sort of the pitfalls of picking your lawyers based on who you see on television. It's not the best strategy necessarily. And I think with Giuliani, it's like that just seemed like, an own goal. Like, why would they disclose? They tried to make it out like it was a strategy afterwards. But if that's a strategy, you wouldn't have this blatant inconsistency between what the president said previously and what Giuliani is saying now. And I mean, the idea that trying to make out the situation where an attorney takes out a home equity loan on his own home to pay off a porn star, and then you pay him back via retainer fees over several months, trying to make that out as though it's just this normal, everyday, sort of run-of-the-mill legal practice it was quite something. I mean, I don't know if there's no situation in which a law firm, if that was an approved practice, right? No one's going to be we're going to front this money for this porn star payoff, and then they're going to pay us back via retainer fees. Oh, and why don't one of our attorneys, why don't they go and take out a home equity loan so we don't have to take it out of the the company coffers and then pay it? It's just crazy.
Well, and there were two important things that came out of that, and I don't remember if it was Trump's tweets yesterday morning or Giuliani's interview where he said, this is a common thing with celebrities,
yeah.
And then Giuliani also said, when Cohen would get reimbursed for this, he would get a little profit out of that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I think the total fee came to $250,000 something over
with taxes and
right. Which I guess some of that was his legal fees for doing this, because basically they said it was a no-show job, that he wasn't actually doing any legal work, but they were paying him $35,000 a month, which is a hefty retainer. It's just sort of unimaginable this happening in any other presidency.
Yeah, and the reporting yesterday, after the fact reporting, is fascinating. That John Kelly, the chief of staff, did not know about it. Don McGahn, the White House counsel, did not know. Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, did not know. So if this was an organized strategy, it seems to me that you would loop in a couple more people so that they could react to it. Do you think a lot of the legal analysis this morning has been that Giuliani made this whole situation worse? Legally and politically. Do you agree?
I think both, yeah. I mean, there's so many situations of what did the president know, what did he know it? And the idea, first of all, Giuliani is getting all this secondhand, right? So we don't actually know how, even if he's telling the truth of what he knows, we don't know how reliable the information that he received is, because he's saying, he wasn't looped into any of this at the beginning. It seemed like, and he's also claiming that somehow that Trump didn't know about this until afterwards, right? So he's saying that Cohen just went out there and did this on his own and, paid off this star, took out a home equity loan. The home equity loan just blows my mind. I keep coming back to that one. The idea that, think of how many steps go into that. There's bank fraud. There's so many things involved in that. Anyway, but the idea that that was some sort of strategy just doesn't make a lot of sense. So we really don't know what the president knew about it. But it seems unlikely and seems very questionable, this idea that he just had no clue about it.
So I meant to cover this in the first half hour when Peter and I just wrapped, but do you follow George Conway's Twitter?
I have push alerts.
Peter, do you follow this?
No,
this
I don't.
So Kellyanne Conway's husband is a prominent lawyer in New York City, and he is live tweeting the Giuliani interview. He then this idea that the Trump folks have put out that a loan from Michael Cohen that is repaid by personal funds of Trump is somehow not a campaign violation. George Conway tweets out the relevant part of the FEC guidance on this that disputes that idea. Not to mention the fact that he also is like tweeting about the fake doctor's note. He's tweeting about Rod Rosenstein. I mean, it is. George Conway is apparently part of the resistance now, from what I could tell from this Twitter feed.
He was like this close to becoming like a very high, prominent, like
exactly.
very prominent figure in the Justice Department. Yeah, I mean, I have push alerts for George Conway. I mean, like everything that you come out of him, you're just like, what? Like, you're just imagining sort of the disputes that must cause in the household. But yeah, I mean, it's just shocking. I mean, like, yeah, because the idea that Giuliani also sort of did two different messages, right? He said that they're doing this for their marriage, because the whole question here is whether or not this was a campaign, related to the campaign.
Right.
It seems sort of obvious in the days before the election that, yeah, obviously the idea this was related to the campaign. What the Trump administration or what the Trump, folks are going to come back and say is that, no, this is all about their marriage. They didn't want to be personally embarrassed, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of the implications of the John Edwards case come up a lot in this because it was sort of a similar situation where he ultimately, wasn't convicted. Because the idea is that, okay, this was just a payment for, protecting our reputation. This had nothing to do with the campaign. But then he immediately says, like, oh, can you imagine, though, if this came out right before the campaign, it would have been devastating.
Yeah.
So you immediately undermine your legal argument is, no, this had nothing to do with the campaign. And then you immediately say, can you imagine if this came out right before the election? It's just, it doesn't make any sense. He doesn't seem like a very competent lawyer these days.
And, Sarah Sanders got beaten up justifiably yesterday on this issue during the press conference, and she was challenged by a lot of people as to her previous statements of this. We got a couple clips from Sarah Sanders.
Yeah, I want to walk through this a little bit because there were a lot of stuff from her yesterday. First of all, what I found to be amazing is she said that she first found out about this stuff when Rudy Giuliani mentioned it during the Hannity interview. Here she is telling the press briefing that.
The first awareness I had was during the interview last night.
So she obviously got some pushback on that and said, well, we just kind of were giving you guys the best information we had at the time.
The president has denied and continues to deny the underlying claim. And again, I've given the best information I had at the time.
And she did multiple times yesterday hide behind this line.
I think it's fair to say that there's ongoing litigation. The president's attorneys who have the greatest amount of visibility into this have spoken about this both at length last night, again this morning. The president's put out multiple tweets on this morning. I don't have anything else to add.
And this clip, that was during a little scrum with reporters during the press briefing. Again, Jonathan Karl from ABC News asked her sort of the pressing question, did Donald Trump lie when he said that Michael Cohen took care of it? He didn't have anything to do with it. You're going to have to ask him about it. Did Donald Trump lie?
Did you know that the president did not tell the truth when he said that he didn't know about the payment?
Again, Mayor Giuliani has spoken at length about this both last night and this morning. There's ongoing litigation. I'm not going to be able to comment.
So that's actually a question I wanted to ask Ryan, right? Because yesterday when this came out, my first reaction was, okay, if their official story here is Donald Trump paid the money back several months ago, but he came out and he lied to the American people when he said that he didn't, which he did do. He came out and said that he didn't do it. Lying to the American public is not a crime.
Correct. He was not he was not talking to the FBI. He was talking to reporters. He was not, under oath in any situation.
It's sort of like the Bill Clinton situation, right? Like lying to the American people when he said that he did not have sex with that woman, Ms. Lewinsky, was not a crime. Perjuring himself was, in fact, a crime, and that's what he got in trouble for. So that's what I think Donald Trump and his legal team might be banking on now.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looks like to me. Like he could possibly skirt that by just saying, like, yeah, okay, we did lie. We lied to the American people, but politicians lie sometimes.
Yeah, I think that they're still going to pick apart that idea that he lied, because I've seen some instances of this where they've, like, gone into individual questions he was asked on the plane at the time, and, and he doesn't respond to the last question, which was, like, I forget exactly what the language is, but it was essentially, was it, like, structured in some way where he was paid back? He just doesn't respond to that one. I mean, he obviously misled, but I guess lie is what they're going to
Yeah, and let's not get. So let's parse a couple things out here. I mean, the investigation right now into Michael Cohen is being conducted by the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York. It is actually distinct from the special counsel's investigation. Yet Giuliani did also make news about the firing of the FBI director, Jim Comey, where he said Comey was fired because he would not give public assurances that Trump was not a subject of the investigation. So again, I don't know how many explanations we've now heard about why Comey was fired, but it does lend credence to Comey's idea, Comey's testimony that Trump wanted loyalty from Comey, and Comey's inability to give that assurance and potentially derail the investigation was why he was fired. And unfortunately, that little snippet from Giuliani has gotten kind of lost in the Stormy Daniels revelations as well.
What also got lost was Mayor Giuliani referring to FBI agents as stormtroopers.
Right.
I mean, which is a pretty significant, for the party of law and order to come out and, America's mayor, the guy who was going in and, was the face of America and the face of American law enforcement, to go in and call American law enforcement officials stormtroopers was quite a moment there.
Yeah, and I think it fits more broadly into the Republican Party's attacks on the intelligence community more broadly, and it's troubling. Obviously, the other there are way too many disclosures this week. We've got a new legal team helping the president. What do you think this does in terms of their posture towards the special counsel and the potential of an interview with Mueller?
Yeah, I mean, optics-wise, I can't imagine Trump's too happy with bringing in someone who is working on the Clinton, impeachment matter. But I think that, that's kind of who you want. You want somebody behind the scenes who actually has experience in these sort of matters, and as opposed to Giuliani, who's going out there as a wrecking ball on Fox and Friends and, sort of blowing up your entire legal strategy. So it's sort of like, I guess they're sort of the yin and yang of the, of this matter, where it's, one person is actually doing the work behind the scenes and the other person's, satisfying Trump by going on television and representing his viewpoint and sort of simultaneously undermining your legal strategy.
If you're just joining us, this is Chris Liu, guest hosting for Bill Press on a Friday morning from D.C. I'm joined by Ryan Reilly. I was about to say Ryan J. Reilly. Ryan J. Reilly is how you follow him on Twitter. Ryan is the senior justice reporter for HuffPost, and we're obviously talking about the developments from Wednesday night's Giuliani interview. One thing we didn't mention, I kind of did this whole roundup of things that have happened over the last week. I forgot to mention the leak of the 49 questions that apparently Mr. Mueller wanted to ask the president. What do you make of that? Well, who do you think leaked that?
Oh, there's almost no chance zero chance. Like, I would bet, I would bet a lot of money on that. The fact that this did not come from the Mueller team.
I have to say, by the way, you are the third guest on the show to say, I would bet any amount of money that it did not come from Robert Mueller.
The problem is, I don't think anyone who's like, you'd have to find an idiot to take the other side of that bet. Yeah. Is the problem. No one's going to take that other side. Like, I really think this came from the Mueller team. First of all, even if you just look at the phrasing of the questions, and the subsequent reporting has been, has put this out there, that the phrasing of the questions is all basically like rewritten from them hearing it audibly.
Right.
So this is like what Trump's team prepared, and then that's what's getting relayed here. I will say that behind the scenes, I think there has been some rumors, certainly, about like exactly who this came from. But I think it's very, 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 very safe to say that this came from somewhere within the Trump team, or someone who saw this from the Trump team.
So
and it would have to be somebody fairly in the inner circle of the Trump team, right? Like, or would it not? I don't know. It seems like this would be something if
it was a well-organized team that had discipline about who got documents, I think that's true.
I think you just answered the question.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. They could have let way too many people have access to this. It's quite possible.
So in Ty Cobb, the departing Maine attorney for the president, in an interview with the New York Times, I think was asked about this, and he said he doesn't believe it came from Mueller as well, the leak. And he says this was clearly leaked by somebody who wants this interview not to happen. Do you think the fact that I was struck by the breadth of these questions, and that's only what was leaked. There could have been, who knows how many questions are out there. Do you think this makes that interview less likely? And if that interview becomes less likely, a voluntary interview becomes less likely, do you think Mueller tries to push it with a subpoena?
To the second question, yeah, I think that that's on the table. Subpoena's on the table. But I think that, there's certainly every person who's appeared on Fox News who's like in support of the president has been pushing this message is like, don't do this interview. Don't do this interview. It's a perjury trap is what they've been referring to in recent days. And I mean, the idea here is that Trump wants to do this. And I'm kind of honestly surprised that Democrats haven't been pushing trying to bait him into it a little bit more, because I mean, Trump thinks he can overcome this. He thinks he can go in and just like, let me answer these questions. It's fine. Like, I'm not scared of anything. And, the idea of like taking the fifth is he's gone out there and said, the mob takes the fifth. That was a line that he used on the campaign trail. So, I mean, there's a part of him that wants to do this. Giuliani has said that, the president's like, let me at him. He wants to go out there and do this. And it's a terrible legal strategy. And it's a terrible idea if you're Trump's lawyers, especially because, I mean, he has such problems just, telling the basic truth about what happened. It's not really a controversial statement at this point.
No, I mean, if you go back, the Washington Post does this great tracker about what they euphemistically call false and misleading claims by the president. They've now passed 3,000 since this administration has started. We can simply just say there are 3,000 lies he's told. You tell any one of those in an interview with federal law enforcement, that's perjury.
Yeah.
Or it's a misleading statement that creates a legal jeopardy. The other thing you've been writing about, and that's been in the news this week, is Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General. There appears to be a concerted effort, not only by our good friends at Fox News, but also by Republicans on the Hill, to try to get Rosenstein out of there as a way to derail Mueller. And this week there was a leak of potential articles of impeachment against Rod Rosenstein, and he pushed back very forcefully this week. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, I mean, he's been pretty quiet up to this point. What's interesting is he always sort of like when his sort of way of dodging this, whenever Trump says something directly, he'll say, oh, the media says this. And it's like, no, Trump said that. But he has to find another target other than his, boss. So he goes with, oh, the media said this. And he's never really pushed back very strongly to this point. But that sort of changed this week because of these articles of impeachment. And basically came out at this museum appearance, was talking about, freedom, or I guess, the First Amendment, the importance of the First Amendment in connection with Law Day, and was asked about these, articles of impeachment. And he said that, the Justice Department isn't going to be intimidated and that people should know that by now. I mean, the idea that this is a good faith effort from the House Republicans is really tough to swallow. I mean, they're asking, one of the key things they're asking for right now is this full memo, which, lays out the details of an ongoing investigation.
And where do you think that memo goes when that memo goes from DOJ to the House Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, it would be a matter of how many minutes it would leak to Fox, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's just tough. It's tough to and so that was what my piece really was about this week was.
Yeah, actually, why don't you talk? I think your piece was an important thing, and I want to recommend folks not only follow Ryan on Ryan J. Reilly, but also read this piece he did for HuffPost.
Yeah, I mean, I think that basically this idea that has sort of been, underlying all of these attacks is that, and there's even been TV commercials that have sort of laid out this point that he's this deep state actor, right? That he's trying to take down the Trump administration. And if you look at his history, it's just so far afield from the facts. I mean, this is a guy who is a Republican. I mean, so I went back and college newspaper archives can be a valuable tool. I went back and found a letter to the editor he wrote in 1984, right ahead of the, when I guess he was probably a sophomore, maybe a junior. And he wrote a letter to the editor about this editorial that was in the paper that was basically expressing disappointment that Reagan was polling so well at Penn at the time. And he was very upset about that and, said this is basically started attacking them as, the liberal media, the elites, and he used the phrase Ivy Towers, and said that, he was proud of the fact that Penn was more like the rest of America than some of the other Ivies, and was saying, that basically you'll see on Tuesday, right? You'll see what happens. Obviously everyone knows it happened in 1984. So I think that the idea that he is sort of this, closet liberal who's is just snuck in there it's just so crazy because this was the man who, again, Donald Trump nominated to take over the number 2 critical position within the Justice Department. So it really says something about his own personal vetting skill, or, he didn't really know him, but his team's vetting skills. If somehow this closet liberal determined to take down Trump got through. I mean, let me just throw out an alternative scenario here, is that Rod Rosenstein has some integrity and is not just going to obey whatever necessarily the Trump administration says, as much as people outside might criticize him. And he came under a lot of criticism for that letter he wrote about Comey that basically gave the president an opportunity or the reasoning, the supposed reasoning to fire Comey.
And why don't we remind people what Rosenstein said in that letter about that was like the first of like 15 explanations we've now heard for Comey.
But that was the official, I mean, that was what they were supposed to go with until Trump. Basically, this letter said that that Comey mishandled the Clinton investigation and that he stepped outside of his role by going to that press conference, by declaring, basically laying out the details of the investigation. He said that should have been left to the Justice Department to make that decision. The FBI was just supposed to make their recommendation. This wasn't supposed to be this big public matter. So basically, going to being unfair to Clinton was the underlying reasoning here, which I think is just also shocking that this sometimes gets buried.
Comey, the initial explanation was Comey was fired because the investigation into Hillary Clinton was not fair to Hillary Clinton.
Correct.
That was explanation number 1 out of what has been an incredibly evolving story over the about last year at this point now.
Yeah, I mean, that was the excuse, which, I mean, also has to be tough for Trump to personally, for his own ego's sake, tough to swallow. Yeah, I'm firing. He has to say it's about something else. I mean, it probably is also about something else, but I mean, it is about something else, but it's tough for him to be able to say yeah, he was the reason I'm firing Comey is he was too tough on Clinton, when the entire basis of his campaign is that the FBI was too easy on.
Well, and you could see in that, and then the story continued to evolve as Trump went and did the Lester Holt interview. Mm-hmm. I mean, if as implausible an explanation as that was, if Trump could have simply stuck to that story, he might be better off than where he is. But you could even tell he physically could not tell that story, and it doesn't work well when he's doing his campaign rallies.
I've said this from the very, very beginning. To pull off a successful cover-up, you have to be willing to do things that you don't want to do necessarily, and that just doesn't square with who Donald Trump is.
No, not at all.
I just can't imagine Trump going up and being well, there are these detailed rules within the Justice Department that you're supposed to obey in terms of the investigation, and that in retrospect, as despite what I said on the campaign trail, in retrospect, very unfair. I didn't get here on my own.
Yeah, the person who spent his entire campaign arguing lock her up is suddenly now going to be the principal defender of rights. And well, look, this is Chris Liu. I am guest hosting for Bill Press. We've been joined by Ryan Reilly, the senior justice reporter for HuffPost. I hope you will follow him on Ryan J. Reilly. We've anything breaking that you want to do a Giuliani right now and tell me something that that I didn't hear about already?
Man, I don't think so. Not that I can, I don't know.
Right.
I think it's probably...
The day is young.
Yeah, the day is young. I'm sure there'll be something that'll pop up, but, based on how that all played out, I'm going to have to say no for now.
Thanks for joining us.
Sure, thanks.
This is the Bill Press Show.
I wanted to find a bank with a purpose. I wanted to find a place that would take my money and not use it to cause the financial crisis, but to fix the financial crisis and to help end income inequality.
The people that we employ are usually clients right off the streets. They don't have an account, but Amalgamated is willing to get that started for them.
Their reputation supporting the working man, I think, speaks for itself. This is a bank that cares for their customers, and I appreciate that.
We were able to access a construction loan through the bank's programs, and that loan has helped us house 28 families in the community.
Amalgamated is a bank that was started for and about working people.
Many of our customers have a deep commitment to advocating for social and economic justice. We share that commitment, and we're not afraid to stand up and say that we need to change some of the way that the country does business.
Giving you everything you need to fight the Trump administration. This is The Bill Press Show. Live at youtube.com/The Bill Press Show.
Good morning, everyone from Washington, D.C. This is Chris Liu, guest hosting for Bill Press on a beautiful Friday morning, a warm Friday morning. I'm sorry, I just keep saying it's 90 degrees outside. I just can't understand what that is. We are going to be joined in a moment by former Congressman Glenn Nye, who is now the president and CEO of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, a wonderful think tank that I know well. You can follow me on Twitter at ChrisLou44. I hope you will follow the show at BP Show on Twitter. And you can also subscribe on YouTube. Just look for The Bill Press Show. But first,
this is the Full Court Press.
Yes, indeed. Just a couple of other stories making news. Okay, so you mentioned in the last hour how this is there have been a lot of things going on this week. One of them has been Kanye West. Kanye West has been tying himself to Donald Trump all week. He said some very controversial statements saying that slavery was a choice. Kanye went on Twitter and tried to walk it back a little bit, but he didn't do a very good job of it. In fact, yesterday in Detroit, Michigan, on 105.1, The Morning Bounce, the hosts of the show said they will no longer be playing the music of Kanye West. They said Kanye West has gone too far, and host Shay Shay at 105.1, The Morning Bounce said, quote, "We don't want to hear Kanye's music. We don't want to play Kanye on our show. We don't want to talk about Kanye anymore, so we're taking a stand, and we aren't playing his music anymore. We are just refusing to give him a platform." Now, by the way, this isn't just Kanye West music. This will include tracks that Kanye has produced or music that he has been featured in as well. So,
you know, it was funny.
Not good.
We were just talking about the interesting dynamic in the Kellyanne Conway household with her husband tweeting. I don't know what happens in the Kanye Kim Kardashian household.
Yeah, you got two high-profile tweeters and social media personalities. What happened?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how one manages that.
Yeah, no. And you know what? I don't want to know.
I don't
really want to know. We mentioned this last hour as well, just a little tease. Here we are. The Kilauea volcano has erupted in Hawaii, leading to mandatory evacuations of nearby homes. Now, there is a subdivision close to the volcano that has been affected already. It's called the Leilani Estates. It's a subdivision in what's an area known as the Lower East Rift Zone of the Kilauea volcano. Shortly before 5 p.m. local time, lava was confirmed at the surface at the eastern end of the subdivision, according to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. So they are saying if you are in the path of this, if you're in that area, you need to get away. You need to get out. These are no joke. When this happens. There are about 1,700 people that have been affected already, and of course, if it gets bigger, there will be more.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. I was in Hawaii on vacation a couple months ago, and I was in Kauai, which had 2 feet of rain within 2-day period. It washed out a good chunk of that island, and now we have this on the Big Island. It's a tough time, but that being said, it's still Hawaii, which is a pretty great place to hang out in.
Exactly.
And they apparently say there's not a great harm, and they've done some really amazing work in tracking volcanoes, and there have been a series of earthquakes that have given them a little bit of advance warning. And so I guess you need lava shoes or whatever one wears during that time.
Yeah, exactly. And one final story. We go to Indianapolis yesterday where an armored car carrying lots of money had a problem yesterday. The back doors of a Brinks armored truck swung open and hundreds of thousands of dollars flew out. Wow. $600,000 flew across the interstate. Is what it was originally reported as losing. Of course, people stopped to pick up some of the money.
Sounds like the scene from a movie.
Exactly. Well, you know what? That's exactly what somebody said. They said this looked like the scene from a movie. And the police have said, if you did pick up any cash, off of the interstate or nearby the interstate, please return it. So if you were driving near Interstate 70 in Indianapolis yesterday and you walked away with a couple of $100 in your pocket,
wow,
the police would like to have a word with you. Just please, just take it back. That's all they're asking.
Somebody's prayers were answered that day.
This is the Bill Press Show.
Good morning, everyone. It is Chris Liu guest hosting for Bill. I've been very open. It's my second time guest hosting. I didn't suck the first time, or I guess I didn't suck, or they really just needed a guest host. And so I'm here this morning again. Real excited for our next guest, Glenn Nye. Glenn is the president and CEO of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, which is a wonderful think tank in Washington that applies the lessons of history to current challenges. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I was a senior fellow there about 5 years ago, and it's great to have Glenn in studio. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Chris.
Glenn, I should also mention, was a member of Congress from the 2nd Congressional District in Virginia from 2009 to 2011. He has a long history of public service as a Foreign Service officer, not only at the State Department, but also at USAID. Glenn, before we dive into the new initiative that you all are launching or have launched, talk a little bit about what the center, the history of the center and what its aims are.
Sure. Well, the center was founded 50 years ago to be a sort of central location for studying presidential decision-making. And it was actually inspired by a thought that President Eisenhower had, that there ought to be a place where you can track presidential decision-making so future presidents can have an easier time and have an easy place to go and get lessons learned. We grew over time to include a mandate to study also congressional decision-making, under the realization that it's hard to understand presidential decision-making if you don't also look at the workings of the Congress. And so we do spend a serious amount of time still on that pursuit of studying kind of the way that the president approaches decision-making, the way Congress internally functions. But we've also developed over a number of years kind of a related mandate, which is to try to promote bipartisan cooperation and better functioning of our governing institutions in Washington. And as you know, it's a very tough time for that mission set. But we're finding, because of a confluence of events, and maybe it's the fact that political dysfunction has now gotten so bad that we've approached rock bottom here, and a lot of people are starting to say, look, there's got to be a better way. And even if it's not about a particular candidate or a particular politician, the system's clearly not functioning the way that it is supposed to. When you have the kind of gridlock that you see on Capitol Hill, and look, there's always going to be some polarization. We get that. That's part of the process. There's always going to be some sort of, combat. But we're trying to find ways, and our ambition is to try to promote what we call effective governance, which is essentially, can Congress do just well enough? Can they cooperate just enough to do the basics? Can they pass a budget that doesn't blow up the deficit? Can they stop threatening to shut the government down every few months? I mean, come on. The average American voter looks at this and says, this is nuts. This is not the way you run a country, especially one that's the the leading democracy in the world.
Right.
And it's just, there's got to be a better way.
Hopefully that was a little bit of a teaser for all of you. I'm here with Glenn Nye, who is the president and CEO of the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. You can follow Glenn at Twitter at Glenn Nye. You can also follow the center at CSPC_DC. So you all are embarking on a new initiative on civility, and you laid the groundwork for this in a piece. And I recommend that folks read the piece that Glenn wrote in The Hill last October. Let me just read a paragraph of that. Glenn writes, the sad deterioration in our civic culture has been underway for some time. It is exacerbated when political parties seek short-term gain, encourage political tribalism. It is advanced by self-serving media figures bent on stoking conflict and controversy at every opportunity. It inevitably results when national figures adopt coarse language and uncompromising positions that appeal to niche groups of hardened fans. So you've begun this initiative. It is co-chaired by two former congressmen, Jason Altmaier, a Democrat, and Tom Davis, a Republican. Talk about what you hope to accomplish at the end of this.
Sure. Well, the commission, we formed the commission because we are a group of people who on our free time, wear our partisan hats. We're Democrats, we're Republicans. We support our teams, but we also realize there's more to it. Whether your team wins this competition or the other team wins this one, we all want to see some basic functioning of government happen in the interim, in between election time. And so we decided that there were obviously some systemic challenges, like some of the ones you just read from my op-ed, that deserve a lot of attention, and they don't usually get as much media attention as the exciting stories of the day, and we understand why. But we decided to form this commission because we wanted to do two things, and one is we wanted Americans, to recognize that the situation is not hopeless. There are things happening. There are reform groups out there, groups that are led by people that think the way we do about the system working better and are fighting the good fight every day. You don't hear much about them. It's hard for them to break through. And of course, like, we get it. When you're talking about a media environment that's covering President Trump, it's tough to break through the day-to-day. The president always will grab the headline. But we did want to take, our best efforts with this group to try to break through and get into the national conversation, a focus on why things are difficult, why there's dysfunction in Congress. And it's not just that they're all bad people, they're all scoundrels up there, right? They have an incentive structure that pushes them to do the things they do and not find cooperation. So we're looking for ways to unwind that. So again, one of the goals is to try to get into the narrative a conversation about why those things are, and talk a little bit about the groups that are doing good work to try to fix that, so we can kind of create a roadmap back. What we call it is a roadmap to hope, because what we found, honestly, to me, is most troubling. And you look at the figures; they're all the data's there, and they've just gotten worse and worse. This isn't a new phenomenon. We recognize that, but when confidence in Congress is around 10%, and to borrow a quote, that's like friends and family level of confidence, right? And no wonder when they keep shutting down every few months. The government, when confidence is that low, and when you have people saying things like, almost 40% of Americans recently said that they had a low level of confidence in the American democratic system. To me, that's shocking. That says people are starting to lose faith that we'll ever get out of this. And I don't believe we'll never get out of this. I think there are pathways to fixing this. They're not easy. And again, there's no silver bullet. There's no one solution here that will fix everything. Simply, there's a lot of work to be done. But the work has started. There is some momentum being built. And we just wanted to tell the story to give people a sense of hope and try to get people to re-engage in the political system again.
So, I planned the conversation this way. So we've bookended it. So after you, we have somebody from the Brennan Center coming to talk about a new initiative, bipartisan initiative they're kicking off as well, as to how we shore up democratic norms, things that we think presidents, Congress should follow that we've now found out really are norms and not laws. But let me push you on this because, when you laid out this initiative, you highlighted a couple of things: partisan gerrymandering, money in politics, the kind of the media landscape. I mean, yes, we can agree that we should move away from partisan gerrymandering. It's certainly an issue that is before the Supreme Court. We could certainly talk about money in politics. That's a issue that the Supreme Court did resolve in Citizens United. So are your recommendations, hey, we should revisit these things, or there are things we can do other than going through Supreme Court action? Yeah, I mean, look, let's be very honest. Some of our recommended actions are harder than others, like you suggested, and the money in politics we think is important. It's tough. But I think it's important that we continue to try to chip away at these things. And one of the main reasons is we feel troubled by the lack of faith, the loss of faith on the part of a lot of Americans, again, that this system can be fixed. And I understand why 65% of Americans in a recent poll said they feel like the system is rigged. A lot of that's got to be due to the fact that they see this outsized role for money in politics. Yes, the Supreme Court has made some rulings that make it hard to, pass a law to fix this. And yet that doesn't mean we should give up. I think there's probably room for some new rules connected to, like, for instance, restricting the amount of money that lobbyists can give to a candidate's campaign while they're lobbying them on a particular issue. We've got to find some way to start rebuilding this trust, and something that the American people can see and say, that's new, that's different, that, it's one step towards a larger goal, but they get us. They're hearing us. They understand why we're saying the system is rigged. We have to recognize why a lot of people have kind of switched off from the political process. And one of the challenges that drives dysfunction in Congress
look, the country is polarized, but Congress is more polarized than the country at large is. But what the incentive structure that leads into congressional behavior comes from the fact that we have extremely low turnout in elections, very low turnout in primary elections, and you end up with members being, very worried about a sort of 9% of the electorate deciding who gets to run in the elections, and those tend to be the 9% that want to see people stick to their guns always. And sticking to your guns on principle is great a lot of the time. But at some point, you got to make a deal on a budget, right? You got to sit down with some numbers, and you have to make some compromises. Otherwise, the cost is you destroy the functioning of the government system. So we've got to find this balance. And I think that the point of our group is to try to chip away at this, get some momentum, let people know about it. So again, we create this sense that it's worth the average American citizen getting reengaged in this process again.
So, Glenn, you're looking at this now from an outsider running a think tank, but you also have a perspective as a former member of Congress who I know ran two very difficult races, whose time in Congress coincided with the rise of the Tea Party. And so at some level, you can say, people aren't engaged. Well, the Tea Party, they were engaged, and they came out. They were single-issue voters, but they came out and voted in 2010. And, the tactics now of the tactics of the Tea Party have now been followed by people on the left and storming town halls. How does your time in Congress shape the work you're doing right now? And let me just follow on to that. Is this incivility, is this polarization, constituents mirroring their leaders, or it's the other way around?
I think to a large extent it's leaders mirroring constituents, but it's a subset of constituents. And look, the people that are most active in politics have every right to be active and be out there. That's how our democratic system is meant to work. But it's also meant to include a broader set of voices. And so what we're trying to do is look at the system and say, are there ways that over time this system has been skewed to represent particular voices over others? And are those voices that are being represented reflective of of the broad country, of the mix and the diversity of points of view in the country? Or do they tend to speak to very specific ways of looking at politics? And again, it's not about positions on issues. People can have very different positions on issues. But at the end of the day, did we give too much power through a skewing of the system to people who won't allow even the basic compromises necessary to just keep the lights on and the government from shutting down constantly, which, again, destroys faith?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're looking at.
I know Tom Davis has written about this, and I think he's gone back and looked at the early 1980s and the overlap in ideology between House Republicans and House Democrats, and there were 100-some members that overlapped, and I think that is probably none at this point right now. But you saw this. I mean, you had to cast some very difficult votes as a centrist Democrat in that 2009-2010 period of time, and there aren't a lot of people there in Congress like you anymore on either side of the aisle.
Right. And that is a trend that has been going on for about 20 years. And, some of it is just these constant wave elections that we've had. They tend to wipe out the more centrist people because those people represent districts which are the most easy for the other party to win. So there's just kind of like a natural systemic thing. And I get it. Like if you're a political party, if you're responsible for a political party for getting the majority, you're going to target the seats naturally that are the closest to the center because they're the easiest for you to flip with the smallest amount of resource. But the effect of that strategy, which is designed to just win the next election, the effect of that strategy is you destroy the ability of members to come together and make the compromises necessary to do the basics. And again, I want to be clear, our ambition is not that the Congress figure out a way to all get along on every issue. That's just not part of our politics, and that's okay. But just to do the basics of passing the budget and also operating with the kind of language that just avoids using enemy kind of terms to describe somebody who disagrees with you on issues. That's what we're looking for, because when you get that kind of contemptuous language as the norm of the day, it's destructive to the process. And when Americans turn on their TVs and they see politicians talking like that, it turns them off and it reduces this faith. And again, I think that's why you're seeing these numbers are terribly high in loss of faith in the democratic system. And that's not healthy for the country. We can't be strong as a country if we can't figure out a way to do the basics well.
I've always wondered what it is like when members of Congress are actually behind closed doors. There's this idea that, we could beat the crap out of each other publicly, but then we can, behind closed doors, we could find a way to work on issues together. There's also this idea that members just don't have that time anymore, given the schedules and traveling back to the district. They don't have the evening social hour kind of engagements, the informal ones that are not based on fundraising that people used to have. What is that dynamic like with members of Congress on the other side of the aisle?
It's been said many times that congressional travel, when you have to take a bipartisan trip somewhere, is the best way to kind of create the basis for civility, because I went on a few different congressional delegations mostly to conflict zones. I represented Hampton Roads, Virginia, which is a military area. So I spent most of my travel in Iraq and Afghanistan. But when you go on those trips with members of the other party, you sit down, you have hours and hours on planes to talk. You do get to know each other a little bit better. And it helps. It makes it easier. For instance, if I have an idea that's going to take bipartisan support, I immediately have a couple of friends on the other side of the aisle that I know personally that I can say, hey, look, we can start talking at least, right? Is there a way we could find enough common ground to get something? Could you find 5 other Republicans that would agree with this if I found 5 Democrats? You have the beginning of a conversation. But what it doesn't really defeat the challenge of, like you suggested, when you go on TV, people go on TV, they're talking to the likely voter. And who are the likely voters are, in many districts, they're really concerned about the primary voter. And again, it's that sort of 9 to 10% of their electorate that is the least likely to support compromise that are showing up every single time. And the reason that's become more problematic over time is that gerrymandering has been part of this. It's a problem. Parties have drawn the districts now to be so strongly one party or the other that the general election becomes uncompetitive, and you're really only concerned about a really low turnout primary. And again, that creates a disconnect from what most people in a district would want to see their member of Congress do and how they actually act. And again, so that goes back to the incentive thing. I think even without changing any member of Congress, if you just change the incentive structures, if you had a little bit more competition in the general, if you had an open primary system where more people could compete, where you had to speak to a larger set of voters, you'd see the behavior in Congress change right away.
If you're just joining us, our guest today is Glenn Nye, who's the president and CEO of the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress. You can follow Glenn at Glenn Nye. You can also follow the center at CSPC_DC. I am Chris Liu. I'm guest hosting. You can follow me on Chris Liu 44. I've just given you this long, I've just shilled for all of our social media, so it's hard for me not to talk about social media. Your time in Congress really kind of precedes kind of this hyper amping up of social media. And it's frankly, look, I mean, you just mentioned, you go on cable TV, you're playing to a certain audience. We're at 280 characters on Twitter. It's hard to be subtle. It's hard to be nuanced. People don't retweet you when you're subtle and nuanced. What is the effect of social media? And I've got to ask you, what is the effect of the president's social media on this? And I understand we're trying to do this in a bipartisan way or a nonpartisan way. But the president certainly is the impetus for a lot of this, I have to imagine.
Look, there's no question. I think that a lot of people have been turned off by the president's approach here. So if we're looking at civility and we're reading the president's tweets, they're usually not the strongest example of civil language that accepts that the other side's got a legitimate point of view, right? And so that's not very helpful. But you're right. You're right to raise social media as a question, and it's not just social media. It's like the polarization of Americans into media columns.
Right.
That's existed for a long time. It's gotten more challenging, and one of the reasons is because social media just makes it so easy to subdivide those groups even in even tighter areas. It also allows for, and this is something we saw recently. It came to head with the Zuckerberg testimony, but it's not just about Facebook. But the issues really kind of, I think, focused on this. It allows for advertising, which is not really clear where it's coming from. It allows for sort of algorithmic determination of what stories an individual person sees. And so somebody who already was likely to gravitate towards a certain type of news story because they feel strongly about politics now just gets inundated with stories not just that fit that sort of general category, but that are more and more and more salacious because the algorithms are designed to promote clicks, right? And so that's how the business side of social media works. that's led to some really bad outcomes. You just get not just polarization, but this really strong stratification of news sources. Now you're entering a debate. You're asking members of Congress to have a civil debate with each other when their constituents who are living in completely different news worlds are communicating them to act a certain way and want them to say certain things. I understand, I think, sometimes why the president sends some of the tweets he sends. I don't understand some of them, but some of them, it seems like he does have a grasp on an audience that he's reaching. I just think it's a challenge when we're trying to promote civility and just sort of set like a red line. Can we agree not to step past a red line? What's a red line? Maybe a red line is we just agree, again, not to use language that assigns words like enemy to our political opponents. Like, let us disagree strongly with them on issues, but recognize also that they're patriots and that they want the country to prosper. And that seems to be something that's really hard these days, but it shouldn't be.
And you've seen this play out. There's, I guess it's a Republican congressional candidate in Wisconsin who has questioned Democrats who are veterans or how a veteran could be a Democrat. We've got this, and we'll play this in the next half hour. We got this amazing ad from Don Blankenship, who is running for the U.S. Senate in West Virginia, who is attacking Mitch McConnell's family. I mean, and this is playing to some people. Again, I don't know about the Don Blankenship ad, but some political consultants, there was some strategy behind this that people think the more incendiary you are in your rhetoric, it gets people's attention. And to be fair, the president gets people's attention. He has a way of driving the news cycle with his tweets. Absolutely. And the more outrageous he is, the more attention he gets.
Look, when I was in office, I was in the House chamber when President Obama was giving a State of the Union address, and a member of Congress interrupted the president speaking to the country and called him a liar.
Right.
And you would have thought, that's it. This person's on his way out of office, right? His voters will throw him out. That's not acceptable behavior. But what actually happened? He raised like $1 million within 2 days online in small contributions. And that's a really powerful but bad message that says, look, if I find ways to be outrageous, I'll get the attention I need to raise money and it'll help my campaign. It's troubling, right? And so you can understand if someone's trying to win a race and they look at how do voters respond? What do I need to do to get the attention to win this race? And you look at the examples from some of the more recent elections, they're not all great. People used to ask me all the time when I was in office, when are politicians in Washington going to act more like statesmen? And my response was, when the voters demand this, they will do it. And so I think, again, it comes back to what does our commission think is the right outcome here? And part of it is trying to empower those voters who are there but don't participate as often as they ought to participate more. And I think, honestly, that would largely solve the problem. That's hard. It's hard to get people who aren't sort of agitated about a particular candidate or a particular issue to show up and vote. But if we made it easier through electoral system reform and if we keep raising the alarm, I think we might be able to have some success there. And again, I want to stress the point that this is hard. There's no one answer that will completely solve this, but it's not hopeless. And there are a lot of great groups that have gone out. This isn't something we're necessarily going to solve by scolding members of Congress to just be more bipartisan and be better. We've got to look at the incentives. But there are groups that are out there going state by state and fighting for a referenda to change some of these rules, to change finance rules, to defeat gerrymandering. There's groups like Represent Us that are out, and I think they've got a ballot initiative in Ohio coming up this week. Mm-hmm. That's something we're watching very closely. Groups here like Issue One working on finance reform. There are groups like the National Institute for Civil Dialogue that are creating spaces for people who want to talk about issues more civilly. And there's interest out there, and I think it's growing strongly right now. So we're trying to play a role to map these groups and kind of galvanize support for people who are actually doing things that will, I think, help unwind this really tough knot.
Glenn, we've got about a minute left. Is there a process? Is there a way for the public to provide their ideas, their feedback to all of you?
Yeah, so, I mean, you gave out our Twitter handle. We'd love to have people comment there. And it's helpful for us to get that kind of feedback. And then, again, we're happy to share information about more sort of grassroots-oriented groups that are going state by state. And people may want to know, hey, in my state, is there something I can join? I think Represent Us on their website's got a map, and you can just click on your state and say, hey, is there something happening in my state to try to flip to nonpartisan district drawing or better finance laws? I'd like to add my voice to that. And so we would be happy to help people get connected to some of those groups.
Is there a proposed time frame for when the final report or recommendations will be released?
I think we'd like to come out and have something preliminary before this election.
That's great.
Sort of let people have a chance to start digesting this. And then, of course, we're going to learn a lot, during this election timeframe, and we'll revise it. So by the end of the year, looking back on November, we'll be able to see, hey, are the trends getting better? Are there things happening that are starting to bend this curve? Are they getting worse? Have we kind of stemmed the bleeding and are we kind of steady state? And I think what we'll find is there's actually a lot of passion and energy out there to change this and fix this. It's just not well directed yet. And so we're hoping to kind of channel all that.
Well, if you've just been joining us, that was Glenn Nye, the president and CEO of the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress. He's been discussing a new initiative that they're kicking off on civility and politics that's co-chaired by former Democratic Congressman Jason Altmaier and former Republican Congressman Tom Davis. We thank you for being here. We wish you well in this effort. Please
thank you.
Follow Glenn Nye on Twitter and the center at CSPC_DC. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
This is the Bill Press Show.
Hey, Hard, what's this?
That's my resignation letter.
You're resigning.
Why? Because you're constantly ignoring me. You're half as active as you used to be, and you get stuff like this. You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit.
I forgot. I'll do better.
Please, don't quit on me.
Okay, but remember, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Listen to your heart. Don't let it quit on you.
Let's go for a walk.
Uncontrolled high blood pressure could lead to a stroke, heart attack, or death. Get yours to a healthy range before it's too late.
Adventure can be found anywhere, but the best place to start is in the forest.
I spy something beginning with S.
Snow?
No.
Snow-covered trees.
Nothing to do with snow.
Head outside to discover incredible animals and beautiful plants that come together to create an unforgettable adventure.
Wow.
So grab your loved ones.
Don't even.
And explore a world of possibilities.
Come on, this way.
Visit discovertheforest.org to find the closest forest or park to you.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Live video, Bill's commentary, the best clips from the show, all in one place. YouTube.com/The Bill Press Show.
Welcome back to the Bill Press Show. This is Chris Liu guest hosting on a beautiful Friday morning. You can follow me on Twitter at ChrisLiu44. You can also follow the show at BP Show and also subscribe on YouTube. Just look for the Bill Press Show. And before we jump into our next guest, let me flip it over to Peter to hear what people are talking about on social media.
Yes, indeed. Speaking of social media, as you mentioned, we are on Twitter at BP Show. I have to mention, first of all, somebody that was listening to the show has created a fake Twitter account,
Faith Initiative,
all about Donald Trump's Faith Initiative, which we said he probably just thought that was a porn star that he wanted to have an affair with, a porn star by the name of Faith Initiative. Somebody has created the Twitter account Faith Initiative, which I really applaud them for doing that. Okay,
Peter, we didn't trademark that before. We just threw it out there.
Yeah, you know what? It's for the people.
Yeah,
it's like Wu-Tang. It's for the kids. Okay, so a couple of different comments that we got on Twitter at BP Show, at BP Show. First of all, Joey Olivia weighing in saying, I think I just heard Jesus laughing about that faith program that Donald Trump said he was going to put into place. Connie Scanlon weighing in on Twitter, again, at BP Show. We had the story about how Twitter said that all 330-some million of its users need to change their password because of some shaky data storage on their part. Connie says, thanks for the heads up. I've changed my password. Yes, I would suggest everybody change their Twitter password. KG says, Mike Pence is nothing more than a blasphemer when we talk about how he says Donald Trump has done so much for people of faith. And Phil says we should just start calling Scott Pruitt Swamp Thing because he clearly is the leader of the swamp. So not only can you reach us on Twitter at BP Show, you can also find us in YouTube in the chat room, youtube.com/The Bill Press Show. Louis says Giuliani is a hack lawyer that wanted to be attorney general. Trump will regret bringing him back now. Oops. And Miriam says Trump's team's questions sound exactly like students following the outline of their notes for the final exam. Trump's team is following all the media discussions and creating their own final. That's Mim, actually. So thank you, Mim. We appreciate your comments. Find us on Twitter at BP Show. Find us in the chat room, youtube.com/The Bill Press Show. And find us on Facebook. Just look for The Bill Press Show.
Thank you, Peter. I am joined by a special guest, Rudy Mehrbani. Rudy is not only, I earlier was about to say former friend. I meant current friend, former colleague, although who knows after we finish this interview. Rudy had a lot of jobs in the Obama administration. I didn't think I fully appreciated this until I went through his resume. So his final job was assistant to the president, director of the Office of the Presidential Personnel Office. He served in other roles, including as the General Counsel of the Peace Corps. He was Associate White House Counsel. He was a Senior Policy Advisor at HUD, where he helped set up the Hurricane Sandy Task Force. He is now Spitzer Fellow and Senior Counsel at the marble mouth this morning, Senior Counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice. You can follow Rudy at Rudy Mehrbani. That's RudyMehrbani, or at Brennan Center as well. Rudy, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. It's great to be here and to see you. You look good behind the microphone. I'd prefer you running an agency, though.
Yeah, I think we all prefer being back in government, but during this interim period of time, we all have to make a living somehow. So it's
that's right.
It's great being here. Well, look, Peter just talked about Pruitt. You said to me, "Hey, I haven't checked the news this morning," and every day, literally, there's another Scott Pruitt story, and I see you shaking your head. You ran the Office of Presidential Personnel, which is the office that not only identifies, vets, selects, helps nominations, appointees get through the process. What do you think about when you see what literally is a daily litany of poor vetting, poor selection, lack of ethics? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, frankly, it's really sad. I think that when you have someone who is in office and who is running the Presidential Personnel Office in a way that increases cynicism around government by not selecting the most qualified, the most ethical folks to be in these incredible positions of trust, that it's really devastating for Americans' faith generally in government. And that's what I feel like is most concerning, is that cynicism and lack of faith in government is something that we struggled with when we were in office. And that's only now being exacerbated by some of the things that we're seeing come out of the Trump White House and specifically the Presidential Personnel Office. And that's going to be really hard to recover from. And it's something that I think about in the work that I'm doing at the Brennan Center and in thinking about what I'm going to do in the future, quite frankly.
So we talk a lot about, we use the word vetting, which is not a word that I think people outside of government really understand. What does it mean to vet somebody for a job?
So this might sound obvious, but when you're in the Presidential Personnel Office, your job is to find the right person for the job. What might not be as obvious, however, is the ways in which you identify the right people. So in addition to the typical HR process, interviewing, reviewing resumes, in government, we have the good fortune of having all of these other tools at our disposal to make sure that the people who we select for the job is that they're the right people for the job. So one of the things that we would put emphasis on is not just the specific qualifications that someone would have and the skills that they would bring to the table and how they would be distinct from other people, but do they share the values that were most important to the president? And that's harder to define, but we would utilize these tools to determine whether or not the people that we were looking at really shared those values. And so we would look at the background investigations that the FBI would complete. We would look at the ethics reviews that the Office of Government Ethics and that the folks up on the Hill would complete, the financial disclosures. And then we would talk to the candidates. We would have conversations with them to figure out why they want these jobs. What is it that they're going to focus on? What are their priorities going to be? And how are they going to manage the people that they have to lead at their agencies? So when you're not doing the vetting work that goes into the selection prior to announcing someone's nomination for an important position, to me, that displays a lack of seriousness around the personnel process. And quite frankly, I guess we shouldn't be surprised about this because personnel and the process involved is one of the more mundane aspects of government. So when you have a president who has shown himself to really not respect the purposes of government and how it helps improve the lives of American citizens, then of course he's not going to respect some of these mundane aspects around personnel. But I mean, Chris, could you imagine what would have happened if President Obama had nominated some of these folks that we see President Trump bringing up to the Hill without vetting them, without having their background investigations and their ethics reviews completed? I mean, Republicans wouldn't have stood for it. They wouldn't have moved forward with these nominees. But Trump is getting, I think, a different treatment, and he's being held to a different standard.
If you're just joining us, this is Chris Luke sitting in for Bill Press today. We are joined by Rudy Mehrbani. Rudy, he has a couple different hats. We're right now talking with him in his role as the former director of the Presidential Personnel Office. I should have said during the Obama administration, because we're talking about the contrast between the Obama approach and the Trump approach. And you've used a word a couple of times. You've talked about the nomination, the vetting process as being mundane. And I think that's important because I think when people do it well, it's a lot of work. It's not glamorous. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't make it through the process. But you don't get the credit for doing it well. And you've seen over the last 15 months what happens when you don't take it seriously. Rudy and I have had this conversation through Twitter about one of the questions that was often asked at the end of vetting interviews, and I had this when I was nominated to be the Deputy Secretary of Labor. It's kind of this catch-all question. Has there anything you have not disclosed that would either embarrass you or embarrass the president, in that case, President Obama? And I often wonder whether the Trump folks ask the question, or they do ask the question, and nothing really would embarrass this president. And again, because you see some of the stories that have come out, and you're like, how could you have missed this? And even if you had seen this, why didn't this disqualify people?
Yeah, one of the things that motivated me when I was one of the jobs I had in the Obama administration was leading the team of attorneys who did this vetting work.
It's really hard work.
It is incredibly hard work, and one of the things I'm proudest of is that while I was leading that team, that there were no personnel scandals that took place, which is incredibly important because, as we've seen, if something pops up during this process, it could be incredibly distracting from the president's agenda, and it can be personally embarrassing, not just for the president, but also for the nominee that you're putting forward. And look, the reason why we asked that catch-all question at the end is because this stuff mattered to President Obama. I remember that in one of the first jobs I had in the Obama administration, it was a relatively junior position as a deputy associate counsel for personnel. And I remember being in one of these vetting meetings, and we were grappling with what was, especially by today's standards, a relatively minor flag. But the flag meaning it was a vetting issue. But the position was pretty significant. And so we were deliberating, going around in circles, and then we left the meeting without any conclusion. And the next day, Jim Messina, who was the deputy chief of staff at the time, came up to me and said, I talked to the president, and the president said that this issue matters and he doesn't want to move forward because of it. And that stayed with me because it meant that the things that we're doing are important to the person who's leading the ship, to the captain of the ship, to the person who's in charge. And leadership matters, character matters, and the standard, if that's not set at the top, as you're seeing with a lot of these ethics issues, I believe, it really filters down throughout the White House staff, throughout the rest of government, and it makes it harder for government to do its job effectively.
Well, and I want to focus on that. You had the fortune not only working in the White House, you worked at HUD, you worked at the Peace Corps. You saw the important work that political appointees can do. And I suppose it is a blessing at this point that there are so many open positions in the Trump administration because they can't seem to find the right people. But that lack of political leadership creates a void that makes it hard to actually do the work on behalf of the American people.
That's right. And you know that better than anyone as well, having served in the leadership positions that you served in. But the career staff at the agencies, I mean, they're incredibly talented and they don't get enough credit. And that's one of the things that I'm hoping will change, partly through the work we're doing at the Brennan Center in holding up the great work that a lot of the career civil servants do. But if you don't have the right people at the helm to lead the career staff, you're not going to be able to move a president's agenda forward. I mean, one of the things that I think isn't talked about enough, and I do think this is true, that one of the greatest determining factors of whether a president can successfully implement their agenda is by making sure that they have the right people in place, because the work of government primarily takes place at the agencies. And if you don't have the right people in place to lead the agencies, to not only do the work that they consider to be routine, but also to pivot and to focus on the policy issues the president wants to focus on, then you're not going to succeed. And I think that we're seeing that in a lot of different places right now.
You mentioned the work you're doing at the Brennan Center. I want to turn to that in a minute. I have to ask you, and Peter and I were just talking about this, there was this incredible story in the Washington Post a couple of months ago about the Trump presidential personnel office. It appears to be quite the party place.
Did we ice? Is that what you were going to ask?
Yes, people are like drinking, they're vaping on the couch. It's apparently the social hub of EEOB. I enjoyed seeing you when I came to your office. I don't recall anyone handing me a beard. I don't recall vaping. What did you make of that story?
Well, look, sadly, I wasn't too surprised by it. A lot of the work that we did in the presidential personnel office, and anyone who worked in our office, I think will say the same, is that we had to pay attention to really small details, and we had to focus on a lot of these administrative aspects of our jobs that really just, quite frankly, weren't sexy. Another example of this is, I think it was yesterday, there was a story in Politico about the confirmation of a set of FTC nominees.
Right.
And Maureen Olhausen, who's a holdover from the Obama administration, has decided that she's not going to move out of her commission position. So
until she gets confirmed for a judgeship.
Exactly. So it could free up the seat for somebody else to fill in. Now, look, that's the kind of detail that my team in presidential personnel would have been focused on, and we would have had a plan in place in advance of even nominating folks. And so we didn't have time to have that much fun.
Right.
And I don't want to make it seem as if we didn't do team building, because we did. We celebrated birthday parties, and we would try to have some sort of social event, especially around the holidays. But I think it was definitely the exception.
No, it definitely is. If you're just joining us, we are here with Rudy Mehrbani. You can follow Rudy at Rudy Mehrbani and at Brennan Center. He served as the assistant to the president and the director of the Presidential Personnel Office under the Obama administration. He is now Spitzer Fellow and Senior Counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice. The Brennan Center's kicked off a brand new initiative on shoring up our democracy. You all announced this initiative in an op-ed in USA Today that Preet Bharara, the former U.S. attorney in Manhattan, and Chrissy Todd Whitman, the former EPA administrator under President George W. Bush. The two of these folks are Democrat and Republican, are co-chairing this. We just spent the last half hour talking about an initiative at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress that's kind of looking at post-Trump, what do we need to do in order to get back to where we all think the country should be. Talk a little bit about this initiative and what you hope to achieve.
Yeah. So building off of that conversation, we really believe that there will be a moment, maybe not while President Trump is still in office, but definitely when he leaves office, to move forward with a set of reforms to ensure that some of the activities and conduct that we see playing out, not just in the Trump administration, but that we've seen by other administrations as well, that there are the right set of guideposts and structures in place so that to prevent that conduct. So, as an example, it's not normal for a president to be trying to interfere in the specific workings of criminal investigations in the Department of Justice. It is no longer normal for a president to not release their tax returns. It is no longer normal for a president to sort of flout the fact or I should say, not try to meet the standards of ethical conduct that apply to other government employees. And so, as you mentioned, the effort is co-chaired by Preet Bharara, who folks might remember is the U.S. attorney in New York that Trump fired, and former Governor Christine Todd Whitman. And they came together because they know that these things really matter, that they're important to the rule of law. And as you saw, Chris, when you were in government, a lot of what we did because there was precedent for it, there was tradition for it, it was the right thing to do, but there weren't necessarily rules and laws requiring us to do certain things. And so the goal here is to look at these norms of governance that stretch across a number of different topic areas and see, what do some of these need to be codified? Do formal policies need to be written? What is it that we can do to strengthen our government to avoid some of the things that we are seeing right now that we think, quite frankly, is bad for government and it's dangerous for democracy?
The new initiative that Rudy's talking about was, as I said, announced in an op-ed in USA Today. And there's two lines of this op-ed that I want to read from Preet Bharara and Chrissy Todd Whitman. It says, "Everyone in the political process must act as if limited by invisible guardrails to avoid abuse of power. But what was assumed to be a solid restriction on improper conduct turns out to be flimsy, relying too much on goodwill or unspoken understandings." And you talk in the process about how, post FDR, people sort of, no president had run for a third or fourth term, but FDR decided to do that, and then we have a constitutional amendment that stopped that. In the Kennedy administration, there was no written rule about not having a president serving, a brother serving as your attorney general, but that happened and rules have been changed. And then obviously there was a series of reforms that happened after the Nixon administration in the Watergate period of time. So is it trying to work on legislation or strengthening the norms? Or I often wonder in this entire process, if we simply had Congress being a co-equal branch of government, a lot of these issues wouldn't happen.
Or if Congress would utilize the authorities that they currently have a lot of this wouldn't happen. And I think that might very well be something that the task force looks at. And I don't want to prejudge the outcomes of the work that this group is going to do. But I definitely think that part of what they'll propose will be new legislation. But they may also simply propose that candidates, when they run for office, make certain public commitments to do certain things, like disclose their tax returns before they're running for office. And I should say that folks here can learn more about the task force by going to its website. It's democracytaskforce.org. And you'll see that we've brought together an incredible group of folks from both sides of the aisle, from all political backgrounds, to do some serious thinking and work on these issues that we think are incredibly important.
So the tax return issue is an interesting one. Obviously, there was a law that was, there was a bill that got through the California legislature that the California governor then vetoed or did not sign, that would have required anybody basically being on the California ballot for president would have to disclose tax returns. What do you think about a 50-state approach to dealing with some of those, or is that just chaos?
I think it depends. I mean, if you're talking about that, you can also talk about possible future constitutional amendments, for example. And I think that it's something we should look at. I also think folks will want to think about what is it that the major parties require of their nominees before they are formally nominated. There's a lot of things that could be done. And I know the California example, and there's also some debate about how much we actually would have learned about Donald Trump's finances had he even disclosed his tax returns, which gets to some of the reforms that I think our group will look at around what should be included in the financial disclosures that presidents need to file annually. So I think all of that should be on the table.
You know, it's interesting. Those of us that live in Washington, D.C. drive every day by the Trump Hotel, which has become a favorite watering spot for Republican operatives, sadly foreign governments, people who want to not only see Trump administration officials, but at least appear to be supportive of the president. And very clearly written in the lease agreement that GSA had with the Trump organization was that there could not be somebody holding office as a owner of that hotel. And so that was something that was clearly stated, but then not followed, and the lease continues, and Congress has not done their jobs. But fortunately, there's some interesting lawsuits that are now looking at that issue to try to enforce that.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that you have a president who supervises the GSA administrator, who has authority over the contract for his personal business's lease of the space. So I'd say that's a problem, and it's something that. When you have people holding public office with the potential of being able to enrich themselves through the authorities they're entrusted with, that contributes to a lot of the cynicism that I think is increasing around government.
What is the time frame for the commission to release a report, recommendations? And you gave a website. Is there a way for the public to provide their thoughts as well?
So I think our goal is to make sure that we have something out before the midterm elections. I think that the public should be asking folks in government, those who are interested in government, what they think about some of the problems that we're seeing. So hopefully we'll have something out before then. The Brennan Center, I would encourage everyone to go to the Brennan Center's website. If you do have comments about this, please submit them to our organization. And I think there's going to be future opportunities as well to solicit input from the public. But the Brennan Center can always use fresh ideas and also the support of your listeners.
We've been here with Rudy Mehrbani from the Brennan Center. This is Chris Liu, guest hosting for Bill Press. Please follow me on Twitter, Chris Liu 44.
This is the Bill Press Show.